Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here on 9 News Watch. I'm Chris Bianchi, joined alongside Dr. Payal Kohli, our 9 Health expert, for a bit more of a detailed discussion here. We're going to get into some of the details about the Pfizer vaccine for children aged 5 through 11 after getting through the FDA advisory panel board today. We got some more information that it was unanimously approved. I believe there's one abstention, but we had the unanimous approval. So we're going to get into some of those questions about that, but also want to emphasize that this is going to be a bit more interactive. So if you do have questions for Dr. Kohli here, obviously our 9 Health expert and a phenomenal resource, you have that resource available to you. Text us at 303-871-1491. Again, that's 303-871-1491, and we're going to try and get to as many of your questions as possible. So start things out here. So again, Dr. Kohli, I think the big news of the day, the 5 through 11 children age group. Now it seems like we're getting closer and closer to that possible approval for that, at least the Pfizer vaccine. What are the next steps in order to get that implemented, and how soon could we be having 5 to 11-year-olds getting the Pfizer vaccine?
It is so exciting because we are days away, and we have waited for this for weeks. Yeah, and if you look at that pie of all the Coloradans who've gotten the vaccine, there's a huge piece of it that belongs to that age group. And across the country, of course, it's 28 million people that might be eligible. So 4 steps have to happen. The FDA Advisory Committee, that happened today. Then that committee makes a recommendation to the FDA. That's going to happen in the next day or so. Then the FDA kind of gives their approval or emergency use authorization for this. Then the CDC Advisory Committee, which recommends what sort of vaccination practices should be done, sits down and looks at the data, not just about whether this is safe and effective, which is what the FDA did, but in whom should we use it? So who do they recommend this intervention in? Is it across the board for kids 5 to 11? Is it a subset of kids 5 to 11? One of the issues that had come up at the advisory meeting today for the FDA was, should there be differences in kids who've gotten COVID and recovered versus those who haven't, just like with adults that we've talked about. And that's step 3, the CDC Advisory Committee. And step 4 is the director of the CDC signs off. And she can agree with what her advisory committee said, but she can also turn it on its head, as we've seen her do before. And then, based on her recommendations, the launch happens and it starts to roll out, and then we start to get shots into arms.
So you said we're talking now days and not weeks, because it sounds like to me, we're cleared step 1 of 4, but maybe to my small brain that might sound like weeks, but you're saying it's days?
No, I think it'll be within the next week or 2 at the most. And this is really based on what we've seen happen with others, like for example the boosters. They went through that entire 4-step process in the matter of a few days. We've got that ruling on the Johnson & Johnson Moderna boosters at the end of last week, and that process had just started at the beginning of last week. So we're really anticipating in the first 2 weeks of November to be able to get our kids vaccinated. And you know what that means, right? By Christmas time, kids can go see Santa this year, right?
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
And I suppose on a more serious note, doesn't that open up more possibilities for children to spend time with their grandparents?
Exactly. All of the things that we have, unfortunately, school trips, traveling, seeing their friends, going to malls, whatnot, and even some of the mask debates we can sort of get into. Whether the masks will come off for kids or not will largely depend on what the infection is doing in the community at the time. So it's not just the vaccination status, but also what the virus is doing. Those are the 2 variables that we use to decide about masks, but certainly it's 1 step closer to getting those masks off.
So yay, that really is kind of sounding quite promising. But
very much.
I know perhaps here this is probably the top level question as well, is if you had a child age 5 to 11, would you vaccinate that child? And if you wouldn't mind running through your decision-making process about that, and maybe for parents out there who might be watching, what they should be thinking about with this.
Yes. So if I had a healthy child, age 5 through 11, 100%. Not a doubt in my mind that the benefits of vaccination outweigh the risks. And as I've said before, a lot of my colleagues that are pediatricians actually have enrolled their kids in the clinical trial in order to get them a vaccine earlier. Now, we don't know if they're getting the vaccine or the placebo, but still they have the possibility of access to the vaccine earlier. We have so much data on this vaccine that I feel very comfortable doing that. Now, what are the outstanding questions that remain in my mind if I had a child as a parent? It would be, well, what are the small safety signals? Because that's what we don't yet know for this vaccine in kids. Now, we know in adults it's pretty safe. We know in adults adolescence, it has that small risk of myocarditis. And the more people that get it, maybe the numbers are a little bit variable, but boosters, whatever, every additional dose of the vaccine slightly increases your chance of having that myocarditis or heart inflammation. But only in young adolescent men is what we're seeing. And it's mild, it's self-limited, it resolves without any really long-term sequela, except in rare cases. So for the most part, it almost is a little bit of cardiac inflammation. And as a cardiologist, I feel comfortable saying that that doesn't deter me. But it is something that as a parent, I might say, well, I would want to continue to follow, because we don't have longitudinal data. We only have kind of a little snapshot of data right now in kids. I would want to continue to follow them 12 months out and also really closely watch as we start giving it to millions about how often is that myocarditis signal emerging.
I'll say this, and this may be a little anecdotal here, but when I hear cardiac inflammation, it may sound, at least to me, maybe I'm a bit of a hypochondriac, but it does sound a little scary. Would you mind walking through what that is and why you feel that, I mean, I know you talked about that a little bit, but why the benefits outweigh the risks here?
Yeah, let's talk more about that. So cardiac inflammation from myocarditis can occur after a virus. In fact, we have seen it occur many times after COVID-19. So the infection itself can cause it. There's a background rate of it, which occurs in our community, because after we get colds, after we get viruses, anything that activates the immune system can cause the immune system to sort of attack itself a little bit, attack the heart muscle, and just cause a little, usually short-acting inflammation. And like I said, for the most part, the cases that we have seen occur after the vaccine have been extremely mild. Very unlikely that people end up in the ICU. The case after the first dose of the vaccine is like the background rate. So it's really not much higher. But it's after that second dose that some people are having a slightly higher risk, especially that young male demographic, of having immune activation in a way that it causes some inflammation in the heart muscle. We have, like I said, not seen any long-term sequela. In fact, the American Heart Association is actually recommending that everybody go and get that vaccine. Even people who have already gotten that vaccine and had myocarditis may still be candidates to get their booster shot. So that's really how strongly we believe in the benefits of the vaccine. But certainly, of course, it can sound scary. But what you want to remember is that the virus itself causes probably a higher rate of that reaction than the vaccine does. And that in the case of the vaccine, it's always been self-limited and not really of any consequence.
Okay.
Did I convince you at all?
I'm trying to think. I'm not a parent, admittedly, but if I was a parent, I'd be trying to think about some of those things.
But you also want to weigh that against the kids ending up in the ICU, the kids having long-term effects on their growth, the kids having long-term effects on their mental development, potentially, because we know that the virus can invade the nervous system and cause infection. The kids having long-term effects on their fertility, because we know that the virus has receptors on the reproductive organs, especially in the young male children. So there's, you want to balance the risk of the intervention, which is the vaccine, which prevents symptomatic and asymptomatic infection, versus the risk, which in my mind, there's a volume of difference between the risks we take in life. When we get into our car, Chris, there's a 1 in a million chance we could have a fatal car accident, right? But we do it every morning, because we take that small calculated risk for the benefit. And that's really how we should think about this myocarditis. Probably a 1 in a million chance, maybe a little higher in Israeli data, but pretty rare versus the benefit, to all the people that get it.
And in your mind, I know you've emphasized this already, it's clear that the benefit outweighs the risk, correct?
No doubt. No doubt. And that's why that FDA vote was so unanimous. There was no equipoise, there was no hedging, there was no split decision. It was very clear how people felt after looking at the data.
With that vote, was there anything, the fact that it was unanimous, and I'm sorry if I'm maybe extending to the limits of where you might or might not know about this, but was it surprising that it was unanimous, A and B? Was there anything else that you might have learned in today's ruling that surprised you or took you away?
There are some critics that were wondering why it was unanimous, because they're saying that making it unanimous is going to really clear the path for universal vaccine mandates in kids, which may not be as compelling as they are in adults, because again, the risk-benefit ratio for us as adults was very clear. The risk-benefit ratio for kids is clear, but it's not as much a benefit to them as it is a benefit to the adults that they're around, and to reducing the spread of the infection. So they said perhaps it should have been a little bit more nuanced as to which kids perhaps would have been, absolutely yes, vaccine mandate, and which kids would have been more optional. Now, I know parents worry a lot about autism and vaccines, so I really want to make sure that we talk about that as well, because there has been absolutely no link between vaccinations causing any kind of autism. And I know that that's a concern that a lot of parents have had, and that's a classic example of misinformation and of taking science that it's associative, not causative, now, and making it something that's potentially causative, because vaccinations do not cause autism. In fact, vaccinations prevent infection, which makes you mentally, physically, and emotionally much healthier. And this whole idea of what's called the hygiene hypothesis, exposing our kids to germs early in life is going to help build their immune system. That's another thing a lot of parents say to me. And that too is not really true, because you don't want to expose your child to unhealthy pathogens that can cause them long-lasting or life-threatening complications like COVID-19 as a way to build their immune system. Instead, you want to exercise their immune system using vaccines, which are safe ways to do it without giving them exposure to the virus and its complications.
Fair enough. Oh, I mean, this is pretty detailed and great information here, Dr. Kohli. I want to actually get to some of our viewer questions, because we do have a couple that are just coming on in. And a reminder, you can text us your comments, your questions here at 303-871-1491. And I got one here, and this is top level, kind of going back to what we've talked about. Why do children need the vaccine when it's been documented that COVID-19 is less dangerous to children than the flu? And again, I know that you've been emphasizing that COVID-19 has a lot of risks, but how does it compare to the flu, perhaps?
Yeah, this is a really important question, and this is one of the reasons I was a little surprised that the vote was unanimous, because when it comes to kids, it gives us a little more pause, because as this viewer pointed out, COVID-19 generally tends to be less symptomatic in kids. It tends to be less severe of an illness. Now, we have seen life-threatening complications occur with COVID-19, like MIS-C, multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, which is essentially where the virus is cleared, but the inflammation that it leaves behind wreaks havoc on the organs. It shuts down your kidneys, it shuts down your lungs, it can cause all kinds of systemic problems. That's how kids are ending up in the ICU at Children's Hospital. So number one, there are kids that have died, several hundred, and have had life-threatening complications from COVID-19. Number two, we don't yet know the long-term consequences of COVID-19 infection in children when their brains are developing, their organs are developing, and we know that COVID-19 is not just a respiratory virus. It can get into your neurons, it can get into your lungs, it can get into your heart, it can get into your blood vessels, it can get into your GI tract, it can get into your, your reproductive organs. So we don't know what that means. So just because a child didn't get sick and have symptomatic infection doesn't mean that the virus is not going to potentially have some long-term impact on their reproductive organs. So that's reason number two. Reason number three is for the adults. Like I said earlier, one of the biggest ways that we are all going to win is if each individual one of us gets vaccinated, because otherwise none of us will win. If we have a big percentage of our population are kids who continue to spread this infection to each other and to parents, to grandparents, to teachers, to siblings, the virus keeps getting an opportunity to mutate and divide. It can become a new variant. It might evade the vaccine altogether if it's a new variant, and then we all start over. So one of the best ways that we're going to go from turning this into something that has shut down our society and our school system into something that is like the flu, we just live alongside, is to continue to really invest in that. I call it the immune system savings bank. You make a deposit every time you get a vaccine. You make a deposit into your immune system savings bank and your child's immune system savings bank. And data tells us that that deposit doesn't just work for that virus. So if you get the flu shot, it actually revs up your immune system, flexes its biceps, and protects you better against other viruses that are not even the flu, because your immune system's just in better shape. So just think about it as taking your immune system to the gym, and it's something we need to do for our kids as well.
So it sounds like maybe with that analogy, you're getting interest too on that savings bank a little bit.
You're getting interest because every year you deposit, you get a little bit more in return. That's right. But if you don't keep depositing, that account goes inactive, and that's the reason to keep continuing to make sure you're staying on top of your vaccinations.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Another question I got here. We've been talking specifically about today's FDA advisory board ruling, which was specifically to the Pfizer vaccine.
That's
correct?
right. That's right.
Are there differences at this point between the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine for children specifically?
There are, actually, and the biggest difference is the dose. So if you're 12 and above, for Pfizer, you're getting the full dose, the adult dose, which is 30 micrograms. If you're 5 to 11, you're getting 10 micrograms, which is 1/3 of the dose. If you're under 5, actually, they're testing 3 micrograms, which is 1/10 of the adult dose. And with Moderna, if you're an adult, you're getting the full dose. If you're 6 to 11, you're actually getting 50 micrograms, which is the half dose. So you have 10 for Pfizer in the 5 to 11 group, and 50 for Moderna in the 6 to 11 group. So it's a little bit difference in dose. Now, I don't know what the data is going to show, honestly, because they haven't been compared head to head. So really, once we start launching them out, we'll know which one is performing better in terms of if there's one that is better or worse for kids than the other. But from what we've seen in adults, they're performing very similarly, especially in the early time period. Now, just like we've seen in adults, the antibodies might start to go away faster, or the protection may not be as long lasting with the Pfizer because it's a lower dose than with the Moderna. Because the adults, remember, it was 30 and 100. So the adults got 100 of Moderna and 30 of Pfizer. And that's thought to be one of the hypotheses as to why the Pfizer may be performing better, because the Moderna may be performing better than the Pfizer because it just had a higher dose.
With that, that kind of leads into discussions about boosters as well. I know we've been focusing on children. That's going to be the main topic of conversation that has been. By the way, again, if you have comments or questions, 303-871-1491, shoot us a text. And again, we're going to start to wrap up here, but I want to get into the topic of boosters here because, we're starting to see those roll out more and more. We've now seen that approved, obviously, as well. What is the proper timing for a booster, and can you walk us through how to properly go about getting one?
Yes. So the biggest question is first ask yourself, are you in that 6 to 8 month window? Because that's your magic window.
After getting your second dose, correct?
That's right. After your second dose. And now if you got Johnson & Johnson, they're saying as early as 2 months you can get a booster. So let's first talk about Moderna and Pfizer because they're the same family and they have similar recommendations. Johnson & Johnson is kind of on its own. So if you got Moderna or Pfizer, 6 to 8 months is your magic window for getting a booster. You can get either the same family or you can switch. There's really no advantage to switching from one messenger RNA to the other that we have seen. So easier to stay in the same family. Now, if you're logistically having trouble finding the right dose, and what I mean by that is if you got Pfizer, it's easy because you just walk in anywhere, it's one dose, that's the one you get. If you got Moderna, your booster dose is actually half of what your original dose was. So you got 100 and 100 as your 2 original doses, you're now going to get a 50. And it's really important because there are a lot of places here in Colorado that are just giving 100 as a booster, that you not get that, because that has not been studied scientifically in people with normal immune systems. The only population we've studied that in is people who have a compromised immune system and need a sort of catch-up dose to catch up to the rest of us. But if you have a normal immune system, or if you're over the age of 65 or kind of average adult, you really need that 50 and not that 100. So make sure that places, certain hospital systems even, and it kills me, are giving that 100. So ask what's being put into your arm, especially if you're getting a Moderna booster. Make sure it's 50, not 100. Now, if you got the Johnson & Johnson, they're saying as early as 2 months after you can get a booster, and there's no restrictions. Like with Moderna and Pfizer, they said only if you're high-risk age group or high-risk occupation or whatever. But with Johnson & Johnson, anyone over the age of 18 who got a Johnson & Johnson should get a booster 2 months or more out. And my recommendation would be to switch over to messenger RNA. Because here in the US, we have the luxury of having access to all 3 vaccines and plenty of them, and they're just performing better. So why stay with a vaccine that potentially has more risks, especially in young women? There's a risk of the blood clot in the brain from Johnson & Johnson. Why not switch over to messenger RNA vaccine that's been performing much better?
So, lesson here is ask what's being put in your arm, right?
Yes.
And make sure it's 50, not 100.
For Moderna's,
For Moderna's.
Yep.
Myself, I think both of us.
Yeah, both of us.
And both of us are from the Moderna gang, right? You were saying?
That's right, we're in the gang.
Or the Moderna gang.
That's right.
And then also, again, with Johnson & Johnson, it seems like after 2 months, go out and get that.
Yes.
Get an mRNA, get a Moderna, get a Pfizer. And as far as you know, is it easy to just walk in somewhere and just get that as easily as possible?
You know, if you're in one of those groups that has been authorized by the CDC and the FDA, yes. But if you're not in one of those groups, it's actually been somewhat challenging in a commercial retail pharmacies. A lot of them are asking, well, which of these categories do you fit into? I would not recommend lying. A lot of people are fibbing or lying or saying whatever to the pharmacist. They're immunocompromised. I would say talk to your doctor and just ask them for a letter or something. If you feel like you're not in that group but you want that extra protection, it is very reasonable, and I'm sure any physician, after they talk to you about the risks and benefits, would be happy to do it. So don't mislead the pharmacist, because that could mess up the dose or the type of vaccine that you end up getting, but instead just engage your healthcare provider.
Okay, so ask the healthcare provider. Final one before we get on out of here that I've got, which interested me. You said between 6 and 8 months. What happens if you go beyond 8 months?
So I'm in this boat, actually. So I got fully vaccinated January 15th, and the Moderna booster had not been approved until last week. And we didn't have good data on mixing and matching either, so I've just been hanging tight. So I'm at 9.5 months. So to be honest, we don't really know, because a lot of the studies have been done in that 6 to 8 month window. But from the principles of immunology, what we can tell is that it's not the end of the world. As long as it's not been years and years, but it's somewhere within a reasonable, even if it's 1 or 2 or 3 months out from that 8 month window, you still will likely be able to tickle your immune system again, which is, remember, what you're trying to do. So if we go back to our working out analogy, you know, you made that New Year's resolution, you're going to work out every day in January, and guess what? January went by, you didn't get a chance to work out. It's okay, you can still do it in February or March. You just want to make sure you move in a little bit slower in terms of, you know, how quickly you ramp up. And similarly, if you're very far out from your vaccine, I would say between the 9 to 11 months, you're probably okay. If you're more than a year, you probably want to talk to your doctor about whether you want to start all over or whether you just want to get that booster.
Okay, okay, that's very interesting. Well, Dr. Payal Kohli, we really appreciate Nine Health expert for this long-lived discussion here about children 5 to 11, and again, some of those booster ideas as well. So appreciate having you on here on 9 News Watch. And again, I'm sure we'll check back in with you. I know you're on with us on 9 News all the time as well, so we'll check back in with you. But for now, have a great rest of your evening, and we'll see you here on 9 News and 9 News Watch here tomorrow as well.
And remember to get your boosters.
Get your boosters.